Okay, so this estrangement video kept coming up from this woman, and I actually identify with a lot of things that she was saying because I've been met with that myself. And so, those of us who have been on social media, you know how, typically they'll put on TV that new things and social media is for younger people, for people's kids, and things like that. Well, what I kept hearing is that the younger generation they just plain didn't like their parents being on social media. That's what it was about. They didn't like their parents being on social media, which then causes an estrangement between the parents and the kids because they don't like to hear what their parents have to say. It kind of bursts a hole in the narrative that they tell themselves related to, that their parents had to do some things in order for them to be born, because, well, let's not go into that. But the estrangement part, I know I was met with my own self, um, was I had another channel, and eventually my son started telling me he was embarrassed by the things I was doing and saying, and he was like in his 30s telling me that. And it's like, he's like, you were doing this, but then how come you started doing this other thing? And it's like, well, the trends changed. What else am I supposed to do? um, you know, I didn't go down the path of doing anything else. I was just following the trends and following the word salads and trying to get back in the groove of the money, without joining a network. Now, the thing is, it's like when you join a network, they can have people doing the same thing because you hear that from Hollywood all the time. I mean, we're hearing that now out of the Hollywood networks, all the adult celebrities who have had to do pornography. And that they're talking about it now. They're saying that they've had to do things that they didn't want to do just so they could get money to survive because that was a part of their contracts and that was part of their non-disclosure agreements. And it's like, I am so glad I never joined a network because the networks that came onto YouTube seem so close to Hollywood. And so if I would have signed a contract with a network, then I probably would have been bound by something, and they could have added something in there that I didn't know about, and then I could have ended up being sued, and by them saying, "Oh, well, you signed this contract, or you said this, and this, and this, and this, and you haven't fulfilled these obligations." And in the contract, but you know how it is; they just change them, is what happens, and so a lot of these contracts come out of foreign countries too. So a lot of the YouTube networks at the beginning, they were out of foreign countries. And I also didn't know that Facebook was actually surfacing posts to my kids. And so they had changed their algorithm. And I don't have Facebook. I haven't had it for many years now. But they were surfacing posts and things that I was saying and writing, and it was showing up to my family and to my kids. And it's like, okay, well, I I knew I was able at one time to post things on Facebook and it wouldn't show up, because I would do little tests on myself and I had a second account. And so I would log into my second account to see if it showed up, and it didn't because I knew at that time Facebook or YouTube was more interest based, and then Facebook was family oriented, family and classmates oriented. And so I didn't know. Then they started doing interest based apparently, and I guess they just thought, well, because you're um might be talking about someone that's in your family, then your post actually shows up to that person in your family that you were talking about. And so then that created problems, and it's like, okay, so I wanted a place to vent. Now you've made it uncomfortable, so I can't talk about anything. Now my kids hate me because I'm talking about politics, and my kids hate me because I said something about a relative and they might have taken it the wrong way. Now my ex-husband hates me even more because my post surfaced to him because he's through a third party, so he's friends with a friend friends with friends with friends, and then my posts show up to him, and then it just goes on down the line related to who you're friends with, and Facebook, and then why people hate you because you posted something, and then and so this is the estrangement, that the woman is talking about. Very lovely woman. Her and I are probably about the same age. She reminds me a little bit of my mom, but very soft spoken, and my mom was very soft spoken. And so when I was, at the time things were going bad with my marriage, it was like my ex-husband had instilled this rage upon me, this rage of, basically being mad at my family. He was always there to tell me that, I'd say something about my dad going on construction, and he's like, "Oh, I bet he had plenty of women." And so he was just destroying in, my brain the things that I, that I knew, and my childhood of how I remembered things. And so for him, he just got some kind of charge out of, when I said, okay, my dad did construction and he was gone a long time, and he's like, yeah, he probably screwed around on your mom. So it was just like he felt like he had to be there just to, and so my husband would say, no man is going to be going out for that long of a time away from his family and not going out and finding some strange stuff in another woman. And I'm like, I really don't think my dad did anything like that. The only thing my mom said one time, that there was a woman who said that my dad came on to her in the same town where we lived. And my mom said, your dad would never do anything like that. So she was basically lying. So I don't know what was going on. I think it had something to do with building. It was at the time he was building houses. And so I think there was something else going on with that, possibly. So if my dad had come on to the woman, or something was, I would have thought she would have called the police on him. That's what I would have thought. That she would have called the police on him if there was something that my dad had done. Why didn't she call the police on him? So instead, there was something else, and it seemed related to my dad's business. The business that my dad had was self-employment. And that was the only time, because they had actually bought a house. The people that, the woman who said it, had bought a house that my dad and had hired a construction crew, and that they worked on, and they built themselves. And so he was actually in a place where he was building houses, and they were taking out loans and things like that, and building houses, to make a little bit of a profit. And so, but then he almost lost our childhood home because of that, and because of the guy he went into business with, the lumber yard. He almost lost his business because he had loans. And so I don't know how my dad did it, but the other guy had all the loans. My dad didn't have any loans, but somehow, I just don't know how my dad, if he bought in with the guy, or the guy just had him there. That's a part I don't know about. That's the part I'm not so sure, and I just don't know about, related to how my dad went into business with him. So my dad never explained that part to me, because my dad said it was the other guy who had loans that he was defaulting on. And my dad didn't have any loans he was defaulting on. And so then the creditors from the other guy who had all these loans to keep his business in business, and that's how he was operating. This was back in the 1970s, guys. So what we have going on now doesn't surprise me. These companies are functioning. All of these brick and mortar business are up into debt into their ears, and then they keep raising prices and expect the American public to pay for it, and we wonder why we have a housing crisis. This was going on back in the 60s and 70s when my dad was a young man. And so this is nonsense, and you people from other countries, you're full of fucking shit. You're full of fucking shit. You know, so um so whatever it is that you're doing, thinking that things are great in the United States, you're full of fucking shit. So I don't know what Donald Trump has done. I'm not responsible for Donald Trump. He's going to have to go to prison. So some international court or something like that is going to have to arrest Donald Trump. If he did business with other countries, he's going to have to go to face the other countries if he's stiffing them out of money. And so so I mean, there's nothing I can do. I can't do anything. So you guys have heard that saying, a drowning person never saves someone, and that's what our country is on. It's on the Titanic. That's Our country is on the Titanic right now with inflation and just prices going higher, and it's like, and I liked, I liked being on Facebook, seeing what my kids were doing, and I would always I would try to adjust things when they said things were overbearing and they didn't want to talk about it. It's like I would just stop. I stopped, but I wasn't surfacing my posts to them. Facebook was doing it. I miss talking to my kids. I love my kids dearly, but I can't force myself into their life. I can't force my kids um, to help me when I need help. I can't force our government to help me when I need help. So I'm just nothing. I'm absolutely fucking nothing. And so you guys wonder why the veterans feel the way they do. Oh, what was the thing that came up on the iceberg? It was called Suicide Bay, and this is a legitimate iceberg. Now, by my mentioning that, I'm probably going to get censored by the algorithm for putting those two things in together. But they said there's a bunch of flooding, and it was one of those lakes, one of those glacier lakes in Antarctica. I believe that's where they said it was at. And so oh no, this is Alaska. Alaska where it's happening. So the North Pole is more or less in Alaska than anywhere if you want a body of land. The North Pole is basically in Alaska right now, it seems like. So Juneau, Alaska, is where the flooding is taking place. And so they said there's this big area called Suicide Bay, and that's what I was looking at. And so one of the dams broke loose up in the glaciers, and so it holds back a bunch of meltwater. And then it comes rushing down into Juneau, and then they flood. So there's a river that's going through Juneau, Alaska. And then, but they said it's happened before. They said this is one of the worst ones. And so so I've been thinking, it's like, well, is the glacier, it must be holding water back from another larger body of water or something. And I'm wondering if the people in Juneau, Alaska are going to have to relocate. Or that's what I've been thinking. And so I've been thinking if the people in Juneau, Alaska are going to have to relocate, then they're in the same situation as anybody else. But it was rather interesting, um, because then it also has me wondering, are they taking this all out of context related to the flooding? And so it's actually the glaciers up in Alaska, what they're talking about. So it's not the glaciers along the rest of the United States. It's just the glaciers in Alaska is where the immediate problem is at, that's causing flooding for them up there because they're moving. And so they said one of these glaciers, I believe in Suicide Bay, they said it's like moving really, really fast, and it's moving a long distance. And then when the dams break inside of the glaciers, then the water comes running down, and so they just call it a glacier lake broke, because at the top, there's the glacier lakes. Now I had seen those before. And so it's kind of interesting. And So if you guys would subscribe and yeah, subscribe. Okay, what happened to my